Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the conference call, which will be devoted to the financial performance of Orlen after the second quarter of 2023. Today's speakers include Jan Szewczak, CFO, Armen Artwich, Management Board Member for Corporate Affairs. A warm welcome to the media and also to everybody who are watching and listening to us live in the social media. Good afternoon again, and let me give the floor over now to the members of the Management Board. Welcome to yet another conference call, which will be devoted to the quarterly results of Orlen. Before I move on to discussing the details, as usual, I would like to, on behalf of Mr. Daniel Bajtek, President of the Management Board, and all of the Management Board, I would like to give the warmest thanks of all our managers and all our clients and everybody who supports us. Moving on to the key facts and figures of the second quarter and the fundamental data and indices. I would like to point out that in the second quarter of the year, we can see quite clearly that our efforts and the need to create a multi-utility business and the resulting synergies, the synergies which actually exceeded our expectations and initial assumptions are bearing fruit. And this is quite clear when we look at the financial performance of Orlen, especially in terms of revenue of nearly 75 billion PLN. In terms of the operating profit, that is LIFO-based EBITDA, it was close to 9 billion PLN, more specifically 8.7 billion PLN, which is really important to us in the second quarter, is the historically high record-breaking dividend paid, which will be paid out shortly to our shareholders, of nearly 6.5 billion PLN in total. This is an enormous amount of money, enormous profits which will be distributed among our shareholders. If you manage a corporation effectively, and this is obviously the very target of our work and of our efforts, we will have money injected not only to our obviously shareholders, but also to the state budget. In terms of the taxes and fees paid to the state budget, they represented nearly 36.5 billion PLN. This is the money that was injected to not only the central government's budget, but also local government's budgets. So we are talking about 41 billion PLN in total, and this is a sign that our efforts and our decisions to build a multi-utility business and the mergers that are actually bearing genuine fruit in terms of our taxes paid to the state budget is important to all of the citizens of Poland. And we have to remember that 50% of our profits come from abroad. It is estimated that we will pay nearly 70 billion PLN to the state budget by the end of the year, and this represents nearly 12% of all the inflows to the state budget. This is a major amount, and it also shows that it was a good decision. And it makes sense to have our own assets, national assets. It makes sense to recover and the assets that were based on silly decisions that were sold before. And it also shows that it is a killer to the state budget to get rid of the national assets. Our predecessors sold nearly 1,000 of Polish companies, and they had a one-off effect. And us, as Orlen, we will pay nearly 70 billion zloty PLN again to the state budget by the end of this year, in this year in general, and we will continue to pay those taxes and fees. So the value of the fact that we have our own national assets is enormous, and it's a sign that we deliver big value and we also share it with our shareholders. In the recent months, the transformation we are discussing at Orlen, geared towards diversification of our multi-utility business based on increasingly state-of-the-art technologies and zero-emission technologies, it has accelerated in the recent months. A key event in this period was a conditional investment decision for Baltic Power project. We started the construction phase that is planned to be delivered this year still. After securing the financing and all the construction permits and building permits, Orlen Group also secured 5 additional new locations for subsequent projects, wind farm or offshore wind farm projects, as part of the licensing process. More than 20 megawatts of the existing and finalized sources of offshore energy will be added to our portfolio after the realization of conditional agreements to purchase wind and PV farms based on the contract of ADP Greenvolt, the Portuguese company. In terms of other key events, in terms of transformation projects as well as organization, crude throughput and upstream, as well as retail and diversification of deliveries, we have it all discussed in this particular slide. I would like to focus on some of them. Our company, Synthos Green Energy, signed an agreement with the Łukasiewicz Research Network on the launch of the European Excellence Center for the Training of Personnel for Nuclear Power. As we said before, we have not done it before in Poland, and 30 graduates already completed the Hydrogen Academy, and this is another project that is focusing on hydrogen business. Orlen Venture Capital VC, Poland's largest fund of this type, launched a platform for the recycling of batteries of electric vehicles. In our opinion, this is a very forward-looking effort, forward-looking project, and we have gained new skills and new technologies, and we will definitely focus on the development of this particular area. After the merger processes, we are continuing with integration processes within the merged companies to release certain synergies and also to release new capacities, and we are expecting enormous amounts delivered on that account. And this shows, as I said before, that the decision to merge Orlen with GNIG and Lotos made sense. We are integrating, we have integrated actually already, we have integrated railway and oil companies. We changed our name, business name, from PKN Orlen to Orlen. Obviously everybody would still anyway refer to Orlen as Orlen, obviously, and this shortened business name will better reflect our multi-utility character of the business. What is really important as an effect of these efforts, we were ranked at position 216 in the Fortune Global 500 ranking, and also we were named one of the top 5 highest growing companies in this ranking. This shows the dynamics of the Polish economy and the potential of the Polish economy. And we, as a flagship company, we are part of it. We have published our climate policy. This is an end-to-end document showing and reflecting our approach to the management of climate change and systematizing our efforts with a forward-looking approach. In terms of crude throughput and upstream, we decided to expand the scope of our investments in the olefin complex. The olefin complex is today it is Europe's largest construction site in terms of the scale of this project. We know that the expectations in terms of new technologies as well as new petrochemical projects products will increase. So this makes a lot of sense. This obviously will require a lot of investments and investment costs, but we know that we need to take a forward-looking approach, and we do believe that the scale of our growth is well justified in this area. In terms of our investment efforts, for instance, we can tell you that in Lithuania at Mažeikiai, we received the reactor, which will be at the heart of this investment. We're talking about the deep crude throughput processing, and we will deliver a very difficult, logistically speaking, operation, and it was successful. In line with our strategy, by 2030, we secured new production licenses in Norway. We are an important player in this market. This will ensure our energy security in this area as well. Orlen entered into the seventh new market. We are finishing the process of acquisition of 266 petrol stations in Austria. This is a very important market. Austria is a transit country in Europe. We have acquired those stations from Thermöl, an Austrian company. As a result, our company, Orlen, will be one of 3 largest fuel players in Austria with a market share of 10%. And we are very happy with this transaction. As we continue our expansion, Polish and European customers will have access to new, modern, exemplary stations under a network, as part of the network that has already more than 3,000 fuel stations across all of Central Europe. This is a major number, and it shows our foothold in Europe. In the Czech Republic or Czechia, we are continuing with the rebranding process. 90% of the stations will be rebranded to Orlen by the end of the year. As far as Poland is concerned, we have started the pilot project for the green stations, the stations that increasingly use renewable sources of energy in order to reduce the consumption of energy even by nearly 90%. And this is the direction that is very promising and very forward-looking, future-oriented as well. In addition to strengthening and bolstering our efforts in terms of upstream and production, as well as diversification of deliveries, we have signed a contract with BP to deliver crude oil for basically and mainly Orlen refineries. Already in this quarter, we will receive those deliveries in Gdańsk. The second gas carrier of the Orlen fleet will be put to commercial use. It was christened with the name of Grażyna Gęsicka to commemorate her in this way, and it delivered LNG from the American Freeport terminal to Poland in June this year. In terms of the second quarter, we may conclude that it was volatile in terms of macro parameters compared to the first quarter. And it must be said that those conditions in the second quarter were increasingly difficult, especially in terms of our petrochemical and refining business, but also in upstream. And this has a number of externalities that were the cause of this effect. We are seeing a number of phenomena that affects us around the world, but also we need to remember about the deliveries from all around the world, such as China or India. As far as the margins are concerned, it must be said that the margins, the model margins, are going down quite significantly. The model refining margin went down by 26% quarter on quarter, mainly on the back of lower margins on diesel oil, and they were partially compensated with higher margins of heavy oil. In terms of diesel margins, they went down quarter on quarter with the recovery of production, for instance, in French refineries, based on the oversupply, after the oversupply of the Russian crude oil, as well as lower demand for distillates on the back of economic recession, higher exports from China, and higher stocks in ports, European ports, just Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Antwerp, Rotterdam. In terms of margins on gasoline, they did not go up significantly quarter on quarter. This was due to lower exports and lower demand for gasoline from Western Europe and also the US. And as I've mentioned before, the strikes in refineries in France. As far as differential is concerned, it is going down quarter on quarter, mainly as a result of the changing structure of the crude throughput, based on Repco crude. As a result, we only process around 10% of Repco crude, and it goes straight to the Czech Republic refineries only, where we still have a long-term contract in effect. In terms of our petrochem business, our business environment remains very difficult. The demand for petchem products is still very low, mainly due to a major slowdown in biggest European countries such as Germany. All hydrocarbons actually went down year on year and quarter on quarter, which obviously had a negative effect on the performance of our upstream segment. The prices of gas obviously had a positive impact. The price of gas went down faster than the prices of electricity, as a result of which the spread was higher, and it affected the consumption of gas in our CCGT units year on year. We must remember about the average exchange rates of PLN versus both US dollars and euro. As far as slide 6 is concerned, which shows the consumption of fuels as well as Polish GDP, we can see that the consumption of fuels went down, especially in terms of diesel oil, based on economic slowdown. However, this was combined with higher gasoline consumption. When you look at all the markets shown on this slide, except maybe for Lithuania, in the second quarter, you can see quite clearly there was a slowdown in the markets. In the Eurozone, the consumption of diesel oil in the second quarter was lower year on year across all markets. As I said, this was offset by higher gasoline consumption. In the second quarter, half of the year, we're expecting a recovery, especially in Poland, and an increase of fuels, we can see that in Poland, in the summer months, the both consumptions are going up. Slide number 8 presents our financial data and operating results. In the second quarter, we generated nearly 75 billion PLN in revenue, which was driven by higher sales volumes, but also on the back of consolidation of our company, of Orlen, with Lotos and PGNiG groups, despite lower quotations of refining products, petrochemical products, and hydrocarbons year on year. LIFO-based EBITDA operational profit went up by 0.5 billion PLN year on year, which was mainly driven by the positive effect of the consolidation efforts driven by the merger with the Lotos Group and the PGNiG Group in the amount of 6.3 billion. It was also supported by the positive hedging, as well as lower provisions for CO2 emissions. These effects were offset to a certain extent by the negative impact of lower sales volumes, lower refining margins, lower differential in the retail segment, and the strengthening of PLN versus other currencies, as I have said before. In addition, we need to remember about the effect of the usage of historical inventory layers, as well as the write-offs of our inventories, net realizable value, as well as CO2 contract valuations, as well as higher cost of labor and overheads. The LIFO effect came in at minus 0.4 billion PLN, which drove down our reported EBITDA to 8.7 billion PLN and the net profit at 4.5 billion PLN. Our financial result in the second quarter was at 1 billion PLN as a result of the positive impact of net foreign exchange differences and interests, combined with the negative impact of settlement and valuation of net derivative financial instruments. Our net result in the second quarter was quite satisfactory, came in at 4.5 billion PLN in a very difficult macro environment and economic recession across all of Europe. Slide number 9 presents LIFO-based EBITDA by segment. In total, it stood at 6.3 billion, driven by the positive impact of consolidation with Lotos and PGNiG Group. The refining segment reported a decrease in EBITDA LIFO, going down by 2.1 billion PLN due to the negative macro effect, as I said before, the usage of historical inventory layers, so as write-offs of inventories. Our petrochemical business reported EBITDA LIFO going down by 1.8 billion PLN year on year due to the negative macro, lower sales volumes, as well as lower trading margins. This must be emphasized here as well. Our energy segment at 600 million going down due to the result of negative impact of lower sales volumes. We have offset these negative effects by the positive impact of the consolidation with the PGNiG Group, which represented 0.3 billion PLN. Our retail business reported a positive amount of 700, comparable year on year, as a result of the negative or lower fuel margins. Upstream 100 million going down by 500 million year on year, which was due to lower sales volumes, as well as the negative macro impact, and the consolidation with the Lotos Group and PGNiG Group. Our gas business went up in terms of LIFO-based EBITDA by 5.6 billion PLN as a result of the positive impact of the consolidation with PGNiG Group. Corporate functions reported minus 400 million, going up by 100 million year on year due to the upscaling of our group's business. This is the part I would like to discuss. I will now give the floor over to Mr. Arman Artvik to continue, and then we'll go back to cash flows and our debt figures. Thank you very much for this discussion. I will now discuss the performance by segment in more detail, starting with the refining segment. In the second quarter, LIFO-based EBITDA stood at more than 2.5 billion PLN, going down by 2.1 billion PLN year on year, mainly due to the negative impact of macro at minus 600 year on year, due to lower margins on light and middle distillates, as well as a major change in the structure of processed crude oils due to a major reduction of the REBCO crude throughput at the company, that is the Russian oil, as well as we've mentioned before, the strengthening of PLN versus US dollar. These effects were offset by higher cracks on heavy fuel oil, a solid hedging, as well as a change in the provisions of CO2 emissions with lower costs of internal usage, which was the result of lower crude oil prices. We reported higher sales volumes across the group, going up by 36% year on year, including higher sales of gasoline by 67%, LPG by 51%, jet fuel by 44%, diesel oil by 23%, and heavy fuel oil by 10%. It must be emphasized here that as much as 48% in terms of the increase in sales volumes were reported in Poland. Those higher volumes, however, did not offset the negative effect of the change in the structure of processed crude oil in terms of REBCO oil. We must emphasize the positive impact of consolidation with the Lotos Group, representing more than 500 million PLN in this quarter, offset by the negative impact of the usage of historical inventory layers, inventory write-offs, and RV, as well as higher overheads and labor costs. In terms of the operating data of this segment, as in the previous quarter, we remained at the very same level in terms of throughput, crude oil throughput at 9.5 megatons compared to the previous year's second quarter. It went up by 2.3 megatons year on year. At Orlen, the throughput went up by 1 megaton as a result of including the Gdańsk refinery throughput, 2 megatons, offset by the lower throughput at Płock, down by 1 megatons due to the maintenance shutdowns of several installations such as CDU, FCC, hydrocracking, hydrogen unit, metathesis, as well as a shutdown of H-oil unit. As a result of these shutdowns, we reported lower fuel yield, going down by 3 percentage points year on year at Orlen. At Unipetrol in Czech Republic, we reported higher throughput by 0.2 megatons year on year due to mainly the lack of the negative effects of cyclical maintenance shutdowns at Kralupy, which took place in the previous year. Year on year, we reported the same, more or less, fuel yield. In Lithuania, the throughput went up by 1.1 megatons year on year, also due to the lack of the cyclical maintenance shutdown from the second quarter of 2022. Fuel yield in the second quarter remained at a standard level. Yield was lower by minus 14 percentage points, which was due to a higher level of from the second quarter of 2022, as we used the inventories of fuel semi-products last year. In the second quarter of the year, the volume went up to 8 million tons, which was mainly due to the consolidation of the volumes from the Gdańsk refinery, but also we reported higher sales in Poland, combined with lower sales in the Czech Republic and Lithuania, down year on year. Moving on to the petchem segment. The second quarter saw a major slowdown in terms of economic figures. As we all know, the petrochemical segment is very sensitive to the general condition of our economy. As a result, the petchem segment reported a loss at the LIFO-based EBITDA level of minus 120 million PLN. This was due mainly to lower margins across all of petrochemical products year on year. To remind you, the petrochemical margin, as well as our economy in general, is a cyclical, it follows a cyclical trend, so it is highly correlated with the GDP. Right now, we are in the phase of a depression, so to speak, in terms of this cycle. This is a long-term, multi-year cycle, but we are expecting a rebound in the quarters to come and especially in the years to come. Economic slowdown also has an impact on the demand for our petrochemical products. In the second quarter, we reported lower sales volumes year on year, especially in terms of PVC, going down by as much as 47%. PTA going down by 37% and olefins going down by 23%. In terms of our geographic distribution, the volumes went down by 70% in Poland and 16% in the Czech Republic. However, we saw higher sales in Lithuania going up by 20%. Other factors that had a negative impact on the results of the petrochemical segment in the second quarter were lower trade margins as well as higher overheads and higher labor costs. In terms of the operating data, you can see that the operational results were affected by maintenance shutdowns, market limitations, as well as lower demand for the petrochemical products. Only in Lithuania and the splitter, PPF splitter in Lithuania reported higher utilization. The sales was at 1.1 megatons, lower year on year by 16%, and we reported, as I said before, lower sales across all of our petrochemical products. Moving on to our energy segment, EBITDA stood at 600 million PLN, mainly driven by the Energa performance as well as PGNiG Termika, which was based on the change in tariffs for heat. In terms of the impact of macro, it was a positive impact, especially in terms of the hedging of electricity prices, but it was offset by lower margins as well as on production as well as sales, and also the negative relation between contract price of network losses versus the market balancing price and distribution. The negative volumes, or the volume effect, was due to the lower electricity production, as well as electricity production and sales increase at Włocławek and at Płock, CCGTs, combined with a negative impact of higher use of gas. We also had a negative effect of higher overheads and labor costs, as well as payments to the price difference payment fund, which was only partially offset by the positive impact of the consolidation of the PGNiG Group's performance, as well as using the reserve created at Energa Group. In terms of the operating data for this particular segment, the energy segment, we produced 3.4 terawatt hour of electricity, of which 60% came from renewable sources as well as gas-fired sources. The electricity production, including PGNiG and Lotos groups, former groups, went down as a result of the general trend for decreasing electricity usage across the country. The same applies to the heat and electricity production in general as a result of introduced incentives to reduce consumption with higher production by prosumers. In terms of sales, we reported an increase in sales by 12% as a result of increased activity on the Polish power exchange of the new trading company Orlen Energia. In terms of heat, the heat sales went up by 4% year-on-year as a result of lower quarterly average temperatures in the second quarter of the year, going down by 0.8 degrees Celsius on average year-on-year. Moving on to the retail segment. In the second quarter, EBITDA came in at 662 million PLN, going down by 35 million PLN year-on-year, which was an effect of lower margins, gasoline margins, or fuel margins in general, and higher costs of operating costs of fuel stations, as the number of fuel stations went up by 262 year-on-year, as well as higher variable and costs and overheads. These effects were offset by the positive impact of solid sales volumes, which makes us very happy. Polish customers increasingly choose Orlen stations to purchase their fuel and non-fuel products at. In terms of the operational data of the retail segment, sales increased by 5%, including by 2/3 in the Czech Republic, with slightly lower sales in Poland and in Germany, going down by 1% year-on-year. The number of fuel stations across our company, across our group, across all the markets, came in at 3,157. As Mr. Szewczak said before, this is a very significant number and it makes us one of the leaders in Europe. The number increased in Poland and Hungary and Slovakia as a result of the implementation of remedies related to the merger with the Lotos Group. Additionally, in Slovakia, it was due to the launch and rebranding of self-service fuel stations, which were acquired from the local network, while in Germany, it was due to the launch of self-service fuel stations, which were acquired from EMV. We are now proceeding with the conditional acquisition of 266 fuel stations in Austria. As a result, we will be one of the top 3 companies in this market. Our market share increased in Poland, in Hungary, and in the Czech Republic and Slovakia, while in Germany and in Lithuania it stayed more or less flat year-on-year. The number of non-fuel locations went up by 261 year-on-year to 2,570. Alternative fuel stations went up in terms of the number by 105. In total, it is now 672 alternative fuel stations in terms of both electric vehicle stations, CNG stations and hydrogen stations. The number of Orlen package locations came in at 8,255 and it has been increasing dynamically, and the clients in Poland, customers in Poland are increasingly also choosing this service as well, which makes us very happy. Moving on to the performance of the upstream segment. Due to macro changes, EBITDA of this segment was at minus 114 million PLN, going down by 400 million PLN year on year. It was mainly due to a major drop in the prices of hydrocarbons across all markets in Europe. In the case of gas, it was down by 60% year on year, and in terms of oil, it went down by 30%. The performance of this segment was also impacted by the write-down on the price difference payment found at around minus 3.1 billion PLN, and it was in the second quarter, while in the year, in 2023, it will be at around 400. And in the second quarter, we reported a drop. This amount is allocated by the company to alleviate the effects of the energy crisis for our end customers. Thanks to the acquisition of the PGNiG and Lotos groups, the average production of hydrocarbons went up significantly, going up by 138 barrel of oil equivalents per day. In terms of gas production, going up by 100 barrel of oil equivalents, as well as the increase also applied to condensate and other products. If we compare it to the production of hydrocarbons year on year, it went down, and the major drop was reported at 23.4 thousands of barrel of oil equivalents per day was reported in Norway. This was mainly due to shutdowns, however, we reported an increase in production in Canada, which was due to faster connection of new wells, newly drilled wells. In terms of the operational data of this segment, the total reserves are at 1,278 barrel of oil equivalents per million barrel of oil equivalents per day, and the average production was at 156,000 of barrel of equivalents per day, including 74 in Poland, 63 in Norway, more than 5 in Pakistan, and 0.4 thousand barrel of equivalents per day in Lithuania. The structure of production in the second quarter, gas represented 74%, and the condensate and oil stood at 26%. Another segment I would like to discuss now is the gas segment, which in the second quarter of the year generated EBITDA at 5.6 billion PLN, including trade and storage at 5.1 and distribution at 0.5 billion PLN. The tariff stands still. However, the prices went down across global markets. We introduced decreases in terms of the prices paid by medium and small-sized enterprises, and as a result, the average price for 1 megawatt hour of gas is at 293, which is down by 17% compared to the previous quarter. Lower costs of gas in the segment was a major contributor, which was a result of falling prices on the spot market and also based on monthly contracts around the world. Compared to the previous quarter of the year, of the previous year, the second quarter of the previous year, it went down. And the average price on all spot and term-based transaction contracts on PPX went up by 11% year-on-year, and the average price of gas from the production segment to the gas segment was at 167 zloty per megawatt hour. We also received compensation from the Price Difference Payment Fund in the amount of 3.1 billion PLN. And this is the amount which will be changing in the quarters to come. We expect that those compensations will be lower. In terms of distribution, we generated 500 million in EBITDA, going up by 100 million year-on-year, which was impacted mainly by the average increase in fixed network fees. In terms of the operational data of the gas segment, the volume of imports of gas to Poland was at 35 terawatt-hour, of which LNG represented 47%. The sales of gas outside of the Orlen Group went down by 27%, which was a result of lower demand for gas. However, it was offset by a relatively high level of the prices that were contract-based. The largest drop was reported among our four big business customers, and this was mainly due to the effect of consolidation and mergers. So the large volumes are sold in the or within the Orlen Group. We eliminated the statistics from outside of the group, Orlen Group, from before the merger. The distribution volume stayed more or less flat year-on-year. And in terms of the storage volumes levels, it was at about 26 terawatt-hours, representing a huge amount in terms of the total capacity in the country. So we are ready for the winter. The depots are almost full, and we believe that we will fill them up to the level that is necessary and sufficient to maintain uninterrupted gas supply and to ensure security, gas security for our country and for our customers. I'll now give the floor over back to Mr. Janusz Szewczak, who will discuss cash flows. Moving on to our financial data, starting from cash flows presented in slide number 23. We have all the data presented, and my comment is as follows. We generated cash flows from operations at 7 billion PLN in the second quarter of the year, mainly due to lower demand for working capital, as well as the settlement of deposit securing hedging instruments at, in total, 10.6 billion PLN on the back of lower gas prices. In terms of our net inflows, in terms of our investments and cash flows from investments, we are talking about 7.3 capex spending and the outflows at 4.9. In terms of other cash flows, especially in terms of CO2 allowances and property rights and settlement of deposits and income tax, it had in general a total impact of 2.4 billion PLN. After the first half of the year, after the first 6 months of the year, we reported EBITDA LIFO at nearly 27 6 billion PLN for the 6 months of the year. Our LIFO effect was at minus 1.6 billion. Our working capital decreased, stood at 14.4 billion PLN. Our CapEx stood at 12.6 billion PLN. We spent 6 billion on CO2 allowances and property rights. This is a major item in our cost budget. This applies to every company. The settlement of deposits and securing hedging stood at 1.2 billion PLN. And as a result, in the first half of the year, we reduced our debt. This is very important to emphasize, by as much as 10.3 billion PLN year on year compared to the end of the previous year. And if we assume a year-on-year comparison, this decrease will be much higher. So, as you can see, we do not use our debt freely. We're trying to deliver profits to remain on the safe side, to make sure that our covenants and our net debt remain at a very safe level, making us stand out from other petrochemical and oil companies, both in Europe and around the world. Slide number 24 presents our debt figure, and we can say that our standing here is very solid. Net debt went down by 24 billion PLN, as a result of major efforts on our side, but also a very economical approach to our business, or even a frugal approach. As a result, we reported minus 12.6 in terms of net debt, but we are obviously in for major investments, and we need to invest our capex spending. In terms of our operating data here, we need to remember that our net debt increased by 1.1 billion PLN as a result of net inflows from operations. The covenant I have mentioned, net debt to EBITDA, at the end of the second quarter was at minus 0.25 times, and the strategy will allow us to have a covenant at 2.5 times, so this is a very solid result. In terms of our financing sources, they're well diversified, and the weighted average maturity is 2025, and it's very important that we reported historically highest ratings in the history of Orlen and the Orlen Group, at A3 with stable outlook from Moody's, at BBB Plus with stable outlook from Fitch. The next slide presents our capex, slide number 25. We are maintaining our capex forecasts for 2023 at 36 billion PLN, twice as much as in the year before. Obviously, the upscaling of our business is incomparable to what we had before, to what we had a couple of years ago or a dozen years ago. We need to remember that we will spend as much as 26.2 billion PLN on growth projects. This is a good sign of our forward-looking approach. We need to do our best to get ahead of the competition. And this is why we decided to have mergers with the Lotos Group and the PGNiG Group. This makes us stronger. This consolidates our foothold in terms of the market, as a player in the market, in terms of the tenders. And this translates into positive financial effects. And it will increase and improve our security and independence in terms of energy. And also improve and increase the stability and security of our customers. We are obviously presenting our capex figures split by segment for the refining, petchem, energy, retail, and upstream and gas, as well as corporate functions. The capex stood at 12.6 billion in the first half of the year. It was split more or less equally by the three major or five major segments, actually. However, we know that we need to accelerate our efforts in this area by the end of the year. And in terms of our macro environment, it will be discussed by Mr. Armen Artvich. Thank you very much, and I need to tell you that in this current quarter number 3, we are seeing a drop based on higher supply of oil across the markets in the world. And the limitations introduced by OPEC Plus also do not allow us to increase the prices of crude oil because of the oversupply of the crude oil in the market. The forecast in terms of prices went down due to free production capacities and lower risk premium. In terms of refining margins, we need to point out that we are looking at higher demand in Europe due to holiday season, the summer season. And I'm not talking only about land transport, but also we can see it quite clearly in terms of the demand for jet fuel, aviation fuel. After the pandemic, we can see a high recovery in the aviation market. And customers are increasingly willing to travel by air, and this obviously impacts the sales of aviation fuel. We are expecting a decrease in terms of diesel oil, even by 60% in terms of the exports of diesel oil. In terms of gas, we reported a major drop in prices, both quarterly and yearly, at TTF due to mild winter and high imports. The last slide presents our market outlook for the second half of the year. In terms of our macro assumptions, we changed those, and we are expecting oil prices to drop to the level of around $80 per barrel. In terms of refining margins, we are expecting them to decline to around $15 per barrel. Differential at $1 or $2 per barrel as a result of changes in structure. Petrochemical margin, we expect it to decrease year on year as a result of a drop in demand, as well as a very difficult market and economic slowdown, and the cyclic nature and the correlation with GDP. In terms of natural gas, we expect around 200 PLN per megawatt hour, and electricity 500 PLN per megawatt hour. We are expecting the economy to rebound, especially in Poland, in terms of GDP. In terms of the demand for fuels and petrochemical products, we expect a decrease and also lower gas consumption as a result of the energy crisis and high feedstock prices, as well as reductions or a more economical approach to gas consumption versus the electricity consumption. As far as the regulations are concerned, there were no major regulations in the quarter that could affect our business. We do not expect them to be reported in the quarter to come. That will be it for the presentation and discussion of our business in the second quarter, and we are now ready to take your questions. Mr. Grigorcevich asks the first question: what is your assessment of the liquidity situation in the context of the payment of a dividend at around 6.4 billion PLN? We expect it to be very solid. We are very happy that we can distribute our profits with our shareholders. This is the way a listed company should proceed. We obviously take care of the best interest of the country, of the state budget, but we also remember about our shareholders. This is a record high amount to distribute, 6.4 billion PLN. This was due to the fact that the previous year was a very, very successful year for us, but also an exceptional year. The situation in the market was exceptional. We observed price shocks. We observed certain unexpected events such as war in Ukraine and so on. To put it in a very concise way, if we have national assets, if we do not sell national assets, if we apply a economical and frugal approach, we will find funds to share with the dividends, to share with the shareholders in terms of the dividend. At the same time, you have the assets to allocate to a number of different projects, such as sports projects, social projects, local projects, community projects. But a precondition is to manage your company in a very economical and professional way. Mr. Jędrzej Stachura, representing Business Alert, asks about the mergers with the PGNiG and Lotos groups. You were talking about the synergy effect. Could you recap and summarize and indicate the areas where the synergies will be the highest? Mr. Szewczak, when he discussed the presentation, mentioned that we were positive, we were taken by surprise on the positive side by the fact that the synergies of the merger with PGNiG and the Lotos groups exceeded our expectations, twice as high as we expected. We are talking about more than 20 billion PLN by 2030. This is an effect of better logistics, more effective logistics, the synergies of the purchasing business effort. When we buy a higher volume together, you can get higher prices, lower prices, obviously. We are also talking about maintenance. So these effects were reflected in the latest Fortune Global 500 ranking, which where we landed at 216. And this makes us a leader in the region, in the CEE region. Those synergies also allows us to proceed with our ambitious CapEx plans that we have mentioned and discussed before. Let me remind you 2 transactions that will be finalized by the end of the year. Purchase of 266 fuel stations in Austria, which is our new home market. This will solidify our foothold in the region, in the CE region. We are also talking about the purchase of 3 wind farms in Wielkopolska region from EDP Renewables. And this is a sign that we are consistently proceeding with our green strategy and solidifying our position in the renewables. This makes us closer, step by step, to the successful delivery of our 2030 strategy. The main challenge here is to maintain dialogue and effective management of a group which now has thousands of employees. However, we have a great dialogue with our employees, with the employees and with the trade unions, and we are ready and able to negotiate and agree on a win-win basis in order to make sure that we grow together. But obviously this is a major challenge on a scale which has never been seen before in Poland by any company. Andrzej Ratajczyk, GPC, asks what were your burdens in the first half of 2023. I have partially answered that question before. We are very proud of the fact that we, as a company, as a major corporation, we are very proud that we can support the Polish budget so significantly. We are talking about nearly 40 billion taxes and fees paid in the first 6 months of the year, more than 40 billion after 7 months, and we are estimating this amount to be at 70 billion by the end of the year. This represents about 12% of the income side of the Polish budget. So it is an enormous injection of taxes and fees to the Polish budget, in the context of a record high dividend we paid to our shareholders and the fact that we drove down our debt year on year by 24 billion PLN, and the fact that we have a huge capex process. We are talking about 40 billion PLN in terms of our capex spending. We have discussed it before. If we want more details, we can say that the tax burden in terms of VAT tax is at 30% of all our costs and 20 billion in the first half. The excise tax represents around 32% of our costs. We are talking about around 14 billion PLN, an enormous amount again, but also smaller costs. They're not small, but they are smaller in comparison. For instance, corporate income tax, it represents nearly 12% of our tax burden. In terms of exact amount, is around 5 billion PLN, also record high amounts again. And the Ministry of Finance every year recognizes Polish companies for the highest taxes, and I do believe that yet again we will receive that award. In terms of the fuel fee, we are talking about 3 billion or more than 3 billion PLN. Emission fees, nearly 900 million, 2%. But other items, we are talking about retail tax, we are talking about real estate tax, supplementary taxes, the tax on the production of certain fuels. So this is a long table and big amounts, but as we said, it pays off to make money in order to pay such enormous taxes. We're talking about 70 billion by the end of the year, as I have to emphasize it again. It can be compared to the absurdity and the silliest ever decisions to get rid of the Polish national assets that were done. Those decisions were made by our predecessors. This is a long-term, future-oriented effort, and it serves our country and our customers and the nationals of Poland. And it is it's worthwhile to work in order to share our profits with our shareholders and with the state budget. And this is what we will continue to do. Ms. Borkowska asks about the hydrogen strategy announced by the European Commission in order to stimulate the production of clean hydrogen. What are you doing in this respect, and when will Polish customers be able to fuel their vehicles with clean hydrogen? We are the leaders of the hydrogen effort in Poland and in Europe. We are proceeding with a number of big projects in terms of hydrogen, and we can take pride in the fruit of our efforts. First of all, we have a number of fuel stations, hydrogen fuel stations. We're talking about East Germany, as well as 2 hydrogen fuel stations launched this year in the Czech Republic, as well as a mobile hydrogen station in Krakow, which was also launched in the recent months and is used to fuel buses in Krakow. So passengers of buses in Krakow can use buses that are powered by hydrogen, so H-powered buses, and the hydrogen comes from our Trzebinia unit. We will launch 2 more hydrogen stations in Poland, in Katowice and in Poznań. A couple of other locations are finalizing works in this area as well. We're talking about Warszawa, Wałbrzych, Bielsko-Biała, Piła, or Krakow again. In addition, we launched Poland's first and one of Europe's very few laboratories which will examine the quality of automotive hydrogen. These services are very interesting, and also for the clients from all around Europe, not only from Poland or from the region. We are also doing our best to educate the personnel which will work in the Hydrogen Revolution project, and a number of the best graduates will start work at the Orlen Group as of September. This will be a paid internship program, and they will obviously contribute to the delivery of our growth and our strategy in this segment. But obviously we will not rest on our laurels. We are planning more efforts, more projects under the umbrella of our hydrogen economy, but we are also building a hydrogen hub where we will produce and purify hydrogen at Anwil in Włocławek. We are talking about green hydrogen, that is the hydrogen produced without any carbon footprint. This is the direction that both the European regulators and the Polish regulators are focusing on. As I said, we are planning more projects here. We are estimating the spending of 7.3 billion in order to build our hydrogen economy, and we are planning to have around 100 automotive hydrogen fueling stations by the end of the decade. There are no more questions, so we are ready to wrap up today's conference calls. Thank you very much for your attendance, and see you next time.